Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And I'm just going through my records and realizing it's getting time to start thinking about fall breeding, or I guess it's spring breeding, fall lambing.
Yeah, spring breeding for fall lambs, which
Yeah.
is hot topic right now. I will say if you haven't thought of it yet, it's not too late, but I'd get on the ball with considerations of what your planning looks like and really being thoughtful in how to carry that out. So in your fall breeding or fall great, your fall lambing group, your spring breeding group, um, how do you go about getting those sheep set up? Or maybe I should ask, first of all, what's the value for your operation to pursue a fall lambing group?
Well, the big issue is we don't have room in a barn to put everybody in at the same time. So we had to break everybody up into groups. And so it just made sense to have a fall group. And so right now we have three groups, and we're thinking about possibility of having four groups at different times of the year. But uh, one of the things is that all the sheep that didn't get bred um, or lost lambs or something like that, rather than them standing for an entire year waiting to be bred and lamb again about this time next year, we can put them into that fall group. And the other part of this too is that those lambs, by the time they hit 90 days, 110 days, you're in a really good market to sell those lambs. Typically, that market price is pretty high. You start looking at that January, February market.
Right. And we know that traditionally our supply of lambs going to market is decreased
Yep.
during that time of year. And so we have some increased demand depending on some holiday stuff and just naturally occurring because of the lack of supply during that time of year. You'd
Yep.
mentioned lambing four times around the calendar. And this is something that's relatively new. You know, you guys were uh, at most doing two times a year with an early group and then a later group for your ewe lambs. What time periods throughout the year are you thinking of putting those four lambing events?
Well, it would make sense if we could lamb every 3 months. That would be the easiest, I guess, because that would give you X amount of time in the barn for breeding and X amount of time in the barn for lambing. It's just trying to get that all laid out and figured out exactly what that should be. Because I've got a group of ewes that are getting ready to lamb. In the next probably 3 weeks, they should start lambing. And I've got a group of ewes in the barn with lambs. And so in the next 3 weeks, they've got to be out. And we got to get all the pens cleaned out and everything ready to go again, all the jugs cleaned out and everything ready to go again. So it gets a
Right.
little,
There's a lot of shuffling. A
yeah,
lot of
there's a lot of
shuffling
shuffling
has to
around
happen.
and there has to be a lot of planning. So right now for the three groups, it's not that big a deal. For that third group, other than I really need to have that second group as soon as they lamb, they need to be out by May so that I can get this the fall lambing group in to get bred. And that seems to be the biggest issue is getting those ewes out with their lambs. And I always worry about putting them out when they're too small, but it hasn't been a
Right,
major.
but you should have grass.
Yeah, there should be grass. That part shouldn't be an issue at all. So right now I have this heavy use
Right.
area, and those ewes that are getting ready to lamb, they're up on that heavy use area, and they're getting their grain at this point.
And so they are not on pasture right now. When you're
Yep.
talking about a heavy use area, it's a gravel area
Yep.
where we have a good amount of drainage off of that. So we can keep those ewes dry and on hay and eating that feed stuff you're putting in front of them.
Yep.
And so you're in that late gestation, pre-lambing, higher plane of nutrition state of the production cycle right now on those, and then the hope is to get them moved into the barn to lamb
Hmm.
kind of right before they start to pop.
Yep. Yeah. So it shouldn't
Okay.
be, I mean, they're used to being in the barn, so it shouldn't be any stress on them putting them in there. And,
No.
but they've had the big thing for us is just getting that month of feeding them about 1 pound a head, or yeah, 1 pound a head per day of corn. Um, and in this group, I have those that 18% pellet. So we're giving them half pound of corn and half pound of that 18% pellet.
Right. The pellet that we talked about there a couple weeks ago
Right.
that
So we
you had
want
mentioned you were gonna use kind of as a protein pellet supplement to mix in along with your creep feed.
yeah.
And so you are doubling up on that, which I think is a great idea. You've got one batch of feed that can really have some dual purpose in your operation. Now, one thing, since you brought up the nutrition in late gestation and getting a pound of concentrated nutrients into those ewes, you've had some records that have shown some lighter birth weights in the past.
Yep.
And what you're seeing, this was a change to the operation to supplement at this higher rate with this higher energy feed stuff pre-lambing. Did you notice a difference in your early lamb crop that has you hopeful for your second round of lambing, that your feed stuff and your energy is improving those birth weights and improving survivability in those lambs?
Yeah, it definitely did. It's always funny because it's pretty much around this 20-22 day window that they're lambing in. Um, Even though they were only bred in the one heat cycle. Those first lambs that are born around that 6.5, 7 pound range, which is still kind of light. And then as we get into those last lambs that are being born, that's when they start getting up that 12, 13 pounds. So it's just the fact that the ewes are eating that corn just a little bit longer than the first ones that lamb. Those lamb weights do seem to go up significantly. So I think it's worth it. It's made a big difference in our survivability rate, I guess, for those lambs and just those bigger lambs because we were just lambing on we just feeding them hay, and those lambs were just so small. We were getting 4.5 pound lambs, 5 pound lambs, and that was just it was just too hard for those lambs to survive.
And you
Little
haven't seen negatives of dystocia or lambs that are too big that
no,
ewes are having struggle or struggling to pass those lambs.
no. The very last lamb that was born, I think I told you was 17 pounds. And that lamb was born all by itself. I went out in the evening, nothing was going on. He came out in the morning, and there's this lamb. And I thought it was a lamb had gotten out and somehow or another got in this jug. And then I'm looking, I'm like, it doesn't have an ear tag because it was all dried off and it was just a little
Yep.
more. It was just
Born
a
for
single. She didn't have any trouble at all with it, apparently.
Yep, born
I
for
didn't have,
greatness right
yep.
there. Yeah. Nice.
uh,
So with your as we get back to our fall lambing, our spring breeding group,
Yep.
what's been your strategy as you've transitioned? Because this fall group, this fall lambing group that you've added has been added within the last 2 years,
Yeah.
correct?
Yep. The
And
last two
so,
last two seasons we've done a fall lambing group.
okay. And did you, we get this question all the time when we're talking about sheep production, and I wish we could just throw a ram out there and 95% of the ewes would get bred out of season regardless of breed.
Yep.
What's been your experience? Have you tried to do any natural exposure, natural breeding windows there in the spring to get fall lambs?
I was going to the first year, and then I talked to a guy, and he said, "Yeah," he said, "I put a ram out with 80 ewes, and he ended up with like 6 ewes that got bred. Nobody else did, and all I kept thinking was, great, just what I want to deal with is just 6 ewes and whatever lambs I get, and it's
Right.
just such a small group that you have to deal with. So I just decided, nope, I was going with CIDRs, and talked to a lady, it's a couple hours north of me, and asked her every question I could possibly think of for using the cedars. And her protocol was she put cedars in and left them in for 2 weeks, 14 days, and then pulled those cedars, gave them a shot of PG 600, about 2.5 cc's, and then turned turned the rams in with them. And so I figured, well, if it's working for her, it should work for me. So we did that, and we noticed within 24 hours those ewes were getting bred. It was really, really fast. And then we did that the first year. And then last year, I think we went to a 7-day protocol, and it took longer for those ewes to get bred, and our conception rate was down. I think that first
Okay.
year we were approaching 90%. And I think last year we were closer to maybe 75%.
Okay.
So that was the only difference we did was using not leaving the cedars in as long. So this year, the idea at this point, the idea is we're going to go back to that 2 week cycle. And that's not such a big deal because they're already confined, and they're already on that ration. So we can set them up ahead of time. And then we did, I think last year we used two different rams. I think we used three different rams, and we just pulled cedars on 3 ewes every other day. So that ram had to cover 3 ewes in a 48-hour period
3 ewes per ram.
per
So
ram.
you're breeding 9 ewes a day,
Yep.
and you're skipping a day in between. So for example, this year you have around 40 ewes that you'd like to expose for your fall lambing group.
Right.
And that's going to take you 9 ewes a day, skipping a day, so 9 ewes every 2 days. Um, you're only going to be breeding for a week.
Yeah. Yeah. Depending on how many rams we use. And we may do more than three ewes.
Okay, so the ewe to ram ratio per day might go up to
Yeah.
like 4 ewes per one ram.
Hmm. Yeah. Be a
Okay,
little leery about pushing it much past that.
yeah, I'd be leery. I mean, if you have the rams and you've got the time for the 3 ewes per
Yeah.
ram, um, when we're this would be what we would consider a hand breeding model. So we're delivering the ewes to the ram.
Yep.
They're in a barn. It's they're close proximity to those ewes. They're not really working really hard other than to cover those ewes. They're not out chasing ewes in the field to try to get them to cycle and get them bred naturally out there. So it's a very different scenario. But you do need that ram needs the breeding capacity in a short window, and that's why
Yeah.
our ewe to ram ratio is so important.
My concern is that if I were to do 5 or 6 ewes per day per ram, that semen count would be pretty low by the time that fifth or sixth ewe were bred.
Right. And unfortunately, that ram, more often than not, is not going to breed all five one time and then go back to recover. He'll
Yeah.
breed one, he'll jump one, three, four, 5 times, and then all of a sudden use two, three, four aren't getting covered as frequently as what number one was
Yeah.
getting covered. And so that's where the breeding capacity aspect goes in, even though there's only a handful of sheep in there. So you've had some success. You just mentioned 90% conception rate. I do want to touch on these are not just mature ewes. Some of these are ewe lambs that have never been exposed or bred previously, and you're able to get those to catch in the spring to lamb in the fall with the cedar, correct?
Yeah, they were just typically they're just too small, um, or just weren't mature enough yet to be cycling on their own. So rather than, like I say, hang on to them for a whole nother year, we tend to let those go and just put them in that fall breed or fall lambing group. Um, and surprisingly, typically our yearlings have a single. You pretty much bet on every time they're going to have a single. I have talked to people recently who've said, "No, we twin every time." And I find that amazing, and I just want to talk to them more to see how that's happening. But maybe theirs are just heavier. Maybe they're breeding for more maturity, kind of a thing. But ours typically just have singles. Um, but I've noticed when we do that spring breeding group and then we land in that fall, an awful lot of those first timers end up having twins.
Okay.
So I feel
And
like
some of that
as far as
has some
genetics, then I feel
maturity.
like we're kind of moving ahead. And I think it has a lot to do with maturity. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's nice, I think, is you get them in that group. You're taking sheep that don't necessarily have value or aren't adding value to the flock in year one
Right.
because they're not breeding. And by 18 months of age, they're ahead of where they would have been if you were to just expose them then as a yearling to lamb as a 2 year old for the first time.
Right.
And then they're in your fall group, which allows for you to diversify your markets, diversify your production system to fit your facilities that you're operating in currently. And
Yep.
so I think that has a lot of value, and it makes it so that you can really be selective on what ewe lambs you expose, so that we're not exposing ewe lambs that are too small to because we have that pressure of needing those sheep to be productive. You say you have a purpose in another production cycle, and so we're not going to push it. We can manage these sheep out on pasture the way that we want to, and then uh, bring you in this spring after you have some additional maturity and get lambs out of you this following fall lambing season. So yeah, I think that fits nicely into into the model that you've developed here previously. So when we're thinking about cedars, uh, I'm and we probably should mention what a cedar is. And do you know what cedar stands for?
Oh, I did it one time, but I don't anymore.
Controlled internal drug release.
That's right.
And that could be incorrect, but
I
I
think that's
think that
pretty close. If that's not it exactly, that is really close. 'Cause I remember
yeah,
the first
it
time
sounds
I
right. I didn't
looked
even
at
look
it
it
and
up.
saw it all
That's
first time
just
I looked at it and saw it all printed out, I'm like, "Oh, that makes absolute sense."
that makes sense. Yep. Why are we talking about cedars? Yep. Um, and it's CIDR for those that aren't familiar
Yep,
with those. And that drug that's being released, it's a hormone. The goal of the cedar is to slowly release progesterone. And we are not going to get into the weeds on repro physiology. We will bring in a repro physiologist to have that hormone discussion and that repro cycle discussion. But for today, just the very high level looking down, big picture is it is releasing, slowly releasing progesterone into that use body.
yep,
And so it's telling that you that progesterone being the hormone of pregnancy recognition that we're pregnant. It'll it'll then interrupt that reproductive cycle, and then when we pull that cedar out, we have this rapid drop in progesterone,
yep,
and so that's what's tr- triggering the onset uh, of that estrus. And um, again, we'll bring in the ReproFizz individual. Today, we just wanted to kind of talk about fall lambing concepts and the use of cedars. And it's something I think they have tremendous use even outside of our out of season breeding. Something we did last fall was for the NSIP flock, we put cedars in all of our ewes and then hand mated those groups to rams, and then our breeding season was about 10 days, and then we put all of those NSIPUs in with a cleanup ram, and that saved us from needing to have pen space for say 30 days for 5, 6 different rams, and really shortened our lambing window, which was the main reason why we were trying to do it.
Okay.
Uh, was so that we started lambing on there were one or two that trickled the end of the week, but started lambing hard on a Saturday, and we were done by the following Thursday. And of that group, I think we had 5 out of about 60 that then land on a following heat cycle.
Yeah. Yep. So that's the other part of that is I see a lot of studies about using cedars and the various length of time that you use those cedars, but very seldom does that include the PG 600. So
Correct. Correct. And so, yeah, I should mention ours was a varied between a 5 and a 10 day. Um, Cedar, the ewes that got bred in the beginning of
uh,
our breeding season had the cedar in for 5 days. The remainder, and gradually through there. So ewes that we pulled on the last day had cedars in for 10, 11 days. Um, I like a 7 day poll. I've seen there's a lot of really there's a ton of different protocols out there. Um, 7 days works for the timing of getting the cedar in, polling, and getting rams in for what we were doing previously. Are we going to stick with that? No, it'll probably change, and there's no reason why. Um, but there's a number of protocols, and the PG 600, what you're doing after that will impact duration of how long that cedar's going in there or where you're seeing success. But we also did not use any PG 600 because of uh, the fact we were breeding in season.
yep.
So,
So we'll have yeah, I guess if you're running out of time or if labor's an issue, maybe just that 7 day, we can put them all in and then pull them all out in 7 days and turn a bunch of rams in with them. Then that's maybe not such a big deal. But I know with us, we'll probably be some of those ewes will be 2 weeks and some of those ewes will be 3 weeks with a cedar in them.
mm. Well,
You
and
know,
that's where, if you're going to go, I get concerned leaving a cedar in for that time over over 14 days,
uh,
um, just for vaginal health, uterine health
yep,
situations. So if I'm going to leave them in for 14 days, I'm going to insert that cedar to line up with the 14 days. And that was why I know it's a confusing description, but why some had a cedar in for 5 and some had a cedar in for 10.
yeah.
Because I knew that if I left it in for a, a short period of time, I could put all of them in one day and then pull as we needed to, and they weren't going to be left in longer than 10 days.
That's
And
what we've done before. We put them all in at the same time and then just pulled them out as
when needed.
yeah, when we were ready to breed. And like I said, and give them the 2.5 cc's of the PG 600. I've never tried it without the PG 600, so I don't know if it makes any difference or not. But it's kind of one of those things where you kind of hate to chance it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And part of that
oh,
is
we said it was like what $5.30 per you for
right. And,
that
and
PG
that's what
600, and I could cover that with a lamp if she's open.
right.
Can't.
And I was surprised. We were going to do a little bit of cost analysis on some of this stuff here, and the cost of cedars has drastically increased. Um, I was recently purchased from just a third party individual, as opposed to going through a traditional point of sale like a Premier One or a Valley Vet or a PBS, just for the sake of cost. And Tom told me what the cost was on one of those sites this morning, and I about fell out of my chair
Yeah.
because I could not believe it.
Yeah, it's gone up significantly. I forget what I told you. Was it 169 for
169 is what you told me.
yeah,
And I remember when you could pick them up again um, at those retailers for $95, $100, and then it went up to like 112,
yeah.
and people were losing their minds of like these are way too expensive, and
I haven't
now they
haven't ordered any for 2 years and was pretty shocked how much they've
yep.
gone.
Yeah, the last I had seen was like 130, and I was like, "Oh, that's way that's way too much money." And
Yeah,
it's not. When you break it down, that's for a pack of 20.
yep,
Break it down, 169 puts you right at like 845, I think
yep,
we had said, and then you add in the PG 600, and you're in that 13 $14 range. I
yep.
do know there's been a lot of conversation here on Facebook recently on sourcing cedars. There was an individual that had mentioned uh, a health, like Australia health website
Oh yeah.
that they were dirt cheap over there. And he had mentioned even with shipping, it's cheaper. You can get them than you
Huh.
can get them here. Um, and so even at that just under $15 mark per you, do you feel like you're getting your money's worth out of this process?
I think I am just on the sheer fact that if I don't do that and I have a very unsuccessful fall lambing group, then I've got to feed that ewe for an entire year.
Right,
Or she's just standing there. And
right,
so that cost is more than the $15. So the ewes that are here have to be making money or there's no point in them being here.
right, right. Yep.
I can't afford to just keep them. I need to have a productive ewe in its place.
And I think the value of that $15 changes when we're talking about using it as a reproductive aid for fall lambing.
Yeah.
So at $15 a ewe, I would have a hard time penciling out. It would just be hard for me to spend the money for an in season breeding in the fall,
Yeah.
lambing in the spring,
Right.
because I know, I can run a teaser through those sheep and get them a little more consistent in my lambing window. Um, it would be difficult for me to justify the money there. I think you still could, especially when you look at labor and how much time do I spend checking the barn or processing lambs the longer I go than when I could be doing other things. And assuming that I'm paying myself $15 an hour, every additional hour of that lambing season that
Yep.
I'm out there is one ewe that was synced up to a cedar.
Yeah.
And so there's plenty of ways I think you can justify that cost, but the fall lambing, spring breeding side of it, I think is a lot easier to justify than to use them in season when we're paying that retail price for the product.
Yeah. I don't mind running out checking for lambs. I mean, I'm always watching Oprah, so I just go out during the commercials.
Right. Right.
Then I got to hustle back in so I don't miss any Oprah.
I was going to say, unless there's a catastrophe out there,
Yes.
then you're in trouble.
Yeah. Then I'm in trouble. I'm going to miss Oprah and I'm not a happy camper. But I just keep telling myself, well, new lambs are better than Oprah. And most days that's true.
Most days that is true.
So no, that's pretty much where we're at with that. But yeah, I don't have a reason to use it uh when we're breeding in the fall. Because most of our ewes are going to catch in that first cycle, and I'm okay with that.
Yep.
I'm okay with stretching that out over, 17 or 20 days. Um, we know that cycle 17 days, but you get ewes that will deliver a little early and ewes that will deliver a little late. So we're kind of in that, 20-22 day window. And while it does seem like it's way longer than that, every time I go back and I look at my records, I'm like, no, it really wasn't that long. It just seems like it was. And
Right.
I think too, then maybe you're not so overwhelmed uh, with everything coming at once. For us, we set up 10 jugs. We can set up 3 or 4 more if we need to, but we're just not overrun with lambs all at the same time. I think too, then in my particular instance, it lets me spend a little more time maybe on each lamb, and,
Mhm.
and I can observe a little more, so I'm not quite so rushed and hurried through the whole process. So
Yeah.
I think for me, it's okay to do.
Other than filling up the water buckets, it was I would not need to do it any other way. I think we
Yeah,
had at one point we had 24 jugs up. And what was really fun is I cleared out all 24 jugs in one day.
yeah,
And so it was like you had this massive pile of pens that were designed to be put up, and then the overflow pens that we said, well, we don't need to use these gates for jug pens anymore, and drug those out of the old barn and used them. And then yeah, it was crazy for a couple of days, as you mentioned, but they were all done. Everybody's done now, other than those couple of stragglers that were on that recycle. But yeah, it was. I enjoyed it, but I also understand what you had just said on not going crazy
yeah.
for lambing season's crazy enough. I don't know that we need to add a whole bunch to it, but yeah, that's it just has to do with labor and input, and, I think if you're lambing across, say, 45 days,
Yeah,
it would make a way bigger difference than if you're lambing in one heat cycle, and
yeah.
the reason you're lambing in one heat cycle is that's what you're exposing
Yep,
for.
yep.
You're exposing for a very short period of time so that you can keep your groups tight and keep your groups consistent. So, yeah, that's something that again, it's for each and every one of us as producers to decide what we want that lambing window to look like. Um, but
And
at some point, do you
that's
think for your
something
fall,
that's something we're breeding for too, is to have those ewes catching that first cycle.
right? In the time of year that you're lambing in assists with that. It's a more
Yeah,
natural timeline for those sheep to drop lambs in that early fall after summer time period. But when we're thinking about fall lambing, do you see, especially with an additional expense now, do you see value in identifying naturally fall lambing genetics, sheep that breed naturally out of season that you don't have to worry about reproductive aids? Is that something of interest to you?
it is, but financially, I don't want to take the risk to find it. Like I said, if I had 40 ewes and I just turned a ram in with them, thinking everything's going to happen naturally, and I only get 5 ewes that get bred.
Right.
Well, it's nice to know who those are, but what do I do with the rest of those sheep?
Right.
You know,
Right.
and not to mention now I got this small little group that I have to manage.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
in a pasture-based system, to me, that would mean they have to go out in their own little paddocks for a while, and that's just more labor than it's worth to me.
Right. And that's something we're desperately trying to find some naturally fall lambing genetics. There's plenty of other breeds
Mhm.
that have identified those naturally fall, those natural out of season breeders. The polypay group of sheep to the point where they're marketing a lot of those sheep as naturally fall lambing
Yeah,
because they want to uh, be able to kind of segregate those two groups from these are the ones that probably would breed out of season, but we're still using a cedar, and then here are the ones that we're not ever putting cedars in these sheep, and you shouldn't have to either. So there are other breeds of sheep that are doing this. The Dorset breed for a long time has been known as an out of season breeder, and have talked to a number of those producers that uh, some will, some won't, and I think that's the same situation of it goes back to genetic selection and identifying the ones that will operate in that natural out of season system. I think it's the same thing with katanas that we need to look at. Um, so yeah, I think it is a struggle though in the early years of that
Yeah.
natural fall lambing selection. How many years are you willing to deal with that small group and feed that open group that will not breed out of season?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the big issue at this point. So we're looking at the finances more than the genetic part of it, just in that fall group. And maybe down the road, maybe that's something we'll try, but at this point, we're just gonna use the cedars. We figure that $15 per ewe is money well spent. Well, we're coming up on our time here, Cam. It's been a pretty good discussion. So we're hoping that those of you who've always wondered about cedars and whether or not they fit in your operation, I hope that you've gained enough information to kind of make a decision on that. So we thank you for listening. And if you want to reach out to us, you can do that by getting a hold of me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. There's also a Facebook page. You can go on there and like and follow. You can leave some comments or some questions there as well. And there's a YouTube channel called the Grazing Sheep Podcast Channel. So I don't have that down yet, but
Yeah,
it's on there. And so we're going back and uploading some of the past episodes. So definitely get on there if you want to watch us talk instead of just listening to us talk, I guess.
not real exciting.
Not real
Just a
exciting. No,
warning.
I'd have to agree.
Just a
Uh,
different platform to listen.
yep, that's definitely it. And so get on there and like and subscribe and all that fun stuff. So it's been fun talking to you there, Cam. We'll catch up with you next week.
Sounds good, Tom.
All righty. Bye.